Ah, the hybrid child has awoken. It is time for more experiments. The pain will only be passing. You should survive this process. Fascinating. You have much untapped power. Do you even realize your potential? If you believe your defiance aggravates me, you are mistaken. Your resistance is as childish as it is pointless. Your own parents gave you up, your friends turned away, you have no hope of escape, and until I get what I require from you, you will not be granted the release of death. I will either light the flame within you or use you as kindling, but you will not remain useless to me. Now, let us continue with the next extraction. By the flame, what is this commotion? Guards, I told you I do not wish to be disturbed. I'm afraid I insisted, Master Charon. Your guards are not to blame here. Great Khan, it is an honor to see you again. What brings you to Karasant? I wished to see the city for myself, and now that the seas are free I could simply take a boat here instead of riding for weeks. I must say, the Northmen picked a perfect spot for this city. It controls the river and entire trade that flows through it. One look at the docks made me realize just how important this place will be to our merchants. And if the lands in the countryside are even remotely as fertile as Asgarden within the walls, then this entire area may become a breadbasket for the Empire. But I'm rambling about secular matters of coin to a priest who clearly has far more important matters to deal with. When I heard you continued your experiments beneath the wine court, I simply had to visit. I hope I'm not intruding too much. Not in the slightest, O Khan, though I had hoped to visit you myself once I have something truly worthwhile to show you. As of now, unfortunately, my research saw only minor practical progress. Wisdom is never easy to acquire, Master Charon. Take as much time as you need. I will inform the army to provide you with whatever material we require, though I see you have a fair number of these half-elven younglings here to work with. And elven ones, as it turns out, my Khan. I may not have many practical benefits to show you, but our knowledge of these creatures has been greatly expanded. These elves are truly fascinating. From what I learned, these ones, the Avari, are different from the ones in the West. Dark elves, they call them. Something about long-time separation caused them to develop various differences, and it seems they have little love for Western elves themselves. Alas, their disdain for us is even stronger, but it is an important piece of knowledge nonetheless. And their immortality... My Khan, there is so much we didn't know before we had the opportunity to experiment on these hybrids. I used to believe their longevity would diminish after a union of elf and man, but it is not so. Those hybrids, in fact, seem to be able to make a choice to either retain this seeming immortality of the elves or embrace mortality of men. Why would they choose the second option is beyond me, but there are records of them taking that route. But it opens so many new questions. How does it work? Is a conscious choice enough for them to suddenly shed their immortality? Is there some covenant they need to strike with some higher power? Is the choice reversible? In truth, for every question answered, I gain dozens of new ones, which is why I'd like to request you to stop sending so many elves to Mordor. I fear that I will run out of them before I'm done learning what I can. I'm sure the Eye can manage without prisoners for a while, Master Charon, but I'd also like to make a request of you, to not lose the sight of what you're working on. The pursuit of knowledge is always a worthy goal, but the Empire needs something practical, something that could help us end this war and bring imperial order to the West. Of course, but as with any other field of knowledge, theory must come before practice. But fear not, Great Khan, the practical applications may be closer than we think, though I admit, of the avenues I pursue, some may turn out to be dead ends. For instance, I have tried to turn these hybrids into a new elite corps of our armies, Great Khan, a force that could train for centuries in preparation for conflict, a force that could pass down their longevity to their own children. But the disdain for us their elven parents instilled in these children seems beyond my power to break. No coercion, no persuasion, no torture can light the flame of loyalty within them. I will keep trying, of course, but for now I focused on another idea. They may not want to support our cause willingly, but we may still extract some value from them, for their blood is powerful, and may serve us even though they won't. My hope here is first to try and remake them. It is known that orcs were once elves, who were remolded by the Dark Tower to suit its needs. And yet, we know that the final effect of this transformation is rather crude. Yes, orcs are numerous and easy to replace, but they can serve as little more than common foot soldiers, and even at that they do not excel. But what if the process could be refined? What if half-elves would react differently to it? What if, instead of turning them into bloodthirsty savages, we could remold them into elite soldiers and untiring workers? It will be a difficult task, no doubt, but if I can't light the flame within them willingly, then perhaps I can transplant one they would not be able to resist. But I also understand it may take many years to remold them properly, so I have also been working on another way of extracting value from these hybrids, one that offers more short-term benefits to us. I have mentioned that their blood is powerful, but it is not just a figure of speech. Elven and half-elven blood has power that can be used in alchemy, and with proper processing and preparation, it can become a base for truly miraculous concoctions. Let me present you. You there, guardsman. This subject here is no longer useful to the Empire. Please dispose of it as a presentation for the great Khan.
Yes, Master Karen. I live to serve the Empire.
There is no...
By the flame, how can a man move with such speed and this might? He ripped him in half with his bare hands.
Indeed. And this is but a first, unpurified iteration of the elixir we made. It, unfortunately, rather violently disagrees with the human body, and this brave, heroic guardsman won't live to see the end of the month. But until he expires, he will be a soldier worthy of a dozen of Dragonwrath knights.
Then what would happen if you gave this elixir to all of the knights?
They would carve a bloody path through the Rhûnian armies without breaking a sweat, but they would most likely perish before even reaching the battlefield. For now, for presentation purposes, the current iteration is enough, but as I said, we are working on improving it, purifying it, ensuring the power it brings won't end with our death. If we can achieve that, no army will be able to stop the Empire.
Yes, but you keep saying we. Who else do you work with on this matter?
Well, you may find it surprising, O Khan, but it is your young son Abdus who has proven to be critical to my work. In fact, I dare say, I wouldn't be able to present to you this first elixir without his help. When I trained him back in Lest, I realized something. Your son indeed lacks stomach for battle. He has no soul of a warrior, but the flame within his mind burns brighter than in any man I have ever seen, myself and, forgive me such boldness, you, my Khan, included. What he lacks as a warrior, he makes up as a statesman, inventor and alchemist. The ideas he has, the diagrams he showed me. With your support, my Khan, young Abdus could become a most powerful man in the Empire without ever setting a foot on the battlefield. We exchange letters and designs constantly, and it were his ideas that allowed me to extract elven blood and turn it into a source of power.
I heard he sequestered himself in the temple in Lest and made requests for various outlandish objects, but I had no idea he was working with you. Why didn't he tell me? Why didn't you tell me?
He asked to keep his work secret, my Khan. He wanted to show you the fruits of his labors once they were done, to win back your favor. But in Abdus's name, and that of the entire Empire, I beg you to once more bestow your favor upon him, for he can give us much more than weapons and soldiers. If his ideas work out, my Khan, then even death itself will have to bow before the might of the Golden Dragon. As wind blew over Kharak's sand, it unfurled golden banners of Rhûn, now flying all across the city. The capital of the Wine Kingdom was now in imperial hands, and its people had to understand their new lot in life. As sun rose up, citizens were herded out of the city by brass-clad soldiers and made to watch as Commander Norway, an elf thousands of years old and a trusted advisor to the wine regent, was put on a stake together with his closest allies and set ablaze. Middle-earth itself wept for the elven warriors, for as their screams rose into the sky, a violent storm erupted, and torrents of water fell from the sky, as if in lament for the scourged defenders of the city. The oils poured upon the pyres by dragon priests cared little for water though, for they could burn even upon the sea, and the execution was finished, although not in a spectacular fashion High Priest Charon wanted. The citizens were then separated, and elves and half-elves were put in chains and taken away flame only knew where. Some were brought to the wine court itself, where Charon set up his temporary headquarters, but not one of them emerged from the palace alive. Others were driven onto the ships, and from there it was as if they vanished from the world. The humans were free to return to their homes, but within a week something changed in behavior of Imperial soldiers. Patrols grabbed people off the streets, and if there was even a slightest hint that they had elven blood flowing in their veins, the people were seized and disappeared in dungeons beneath the wine court. By that time, first of Easter Dawnwinrim, those who sided or were bought by Count Ukar started arriving in the city to serve as a new administration, and were met with fierce hatred of the locals. Resistance brewed in dark corners of the city, but was met swiftly with overwhelming violence by the occupying army. And if the soldiers could not stand up to the Dragon Wrath Knights, there was only one outcome for the rebels. Most were killed in raids on their hideouts, and those who were captured were made an example of on burning pyres. The priests marched into the streets afterwards and began spreading the imperial doctrine, for the people of Kharak's Sand had to understand that if they wanted to be protected by imperial laws, they had to accept their new overlords. As weeks and months went by, the resistance subsided, if only from desire to survive. But not a day went by when people of Kharak's Sand didn't gaze longingly to the west, in hopes of seeing army of the coalition marching to free them. For now, however, it did not look like help was coming, and the city slowly but surely became pacified, and more Easterlings moved in, for it was truly a city that could glitter almost as much as Mistrand itself. Kharak's Sand was a smaller and less populous city than Imperial capital, but the infrastructure within the walls was nothing short of amazing. When elves of wind and forest took over most of government positions to improve efficiency, these were not just empty words. Great markets in the city were connected with wide roads with series of warehouses, jetties and canals that connected it to the Sea of Rhûn and River Seljuin. Entire offices were set up to oversee traders. Roads were well maintained, safe, and dotted with fortified taverns and caravan stops that enticed merchants from far away to come to the capital of the Wine Kingdom and spend their gold. Even to warriors like Rudas and Kavatha, it was obvious this city could become a major moneymaker. For now, with the sea fully under Imperial control, Rhûn could use it as a gateway between East and West, and roll in gold that such trade settlement would bring. The area around the city was bound to be profitable too. There was no wonder why the kingdom produced such good wine, for its lands were more fertile than any other around the sea, and under elven oversight, they were well organized and developed, and could bring its bounty to the Golden Empire's coffers. And gold was needed, for the war was just starting. More dwarves were seen in the north, and men of Dale no doubt mustered their forces further up the river. And, of course, the Dawnwinrim themselves no doubt plotted how to retake their lands. But for now, the capital of their proud kingdom would become a major source of income for their imperial enemies, and the longer Rhûn held it, the more difficult the city would be to retake. Allies of Dorwynrim would try to retake it anyway though, or at least provide a distraction, and soon words of yet another dwarven expedition marching south reached Imperial forces. Uldor and Kabisa set off to meet them, their army recently reinforced by fresh recruits from Rhûn heartlands. It was a force worthy of respect, numerous and well-equipped to deal with all manner of enemies, heavily armoured dwarven infantry included. Though there was a bit of confusion within the ranks as to who was actually in charge of their force. Uldor did outrank Kabisa, but after hearing about her performance in combat and respect the men had for her, he decided to allow her to be in charge of the campaign in the north, with restriction that if things proved to be going really badly, he'd have the full right to overrule her decisions. Some soldiers approved of that, especially since, as of now, Kabisa was the only one with experience fighting dwarves, but some grumbled that Khan's own son should not take orders from some jumped-up commoner woman who openly questioned the decisions of her betters. Still, Uldor stood by his decision, partially for he was a man not prone to internal conflicts and pride, and could accept that other people could be more experienced and competent than him. Some rumors also abound that he simply had no patience to argue with Arulad woman, and there was cold, professional distance between two officers who didn't interact with each other unless they absolutely had to. Still, when Dwarven artillery regiment was spotted marching towards Winterian Yaur, both commanders left their mutual disdain behind and marched out to meet forces of Erebor in the field, to, as Kabisa said, put the diggers in their place. And the Empire had a nasty surprise for the dwarves. Over the past few years, a fair number of Dorwynrim who sided with Rhûn found new lives in the Easterling cities and villages, and began slowly integrating themselves with the locals. As months and years went by, they brought their own skills and experiences to the Empire, and a few small vineries appeared around Nistrand. Their owners were not content to just repeat what they did back home though, and after first harvest they began experimenting with exotic eastern spices and fruits, creating completely new wines that sold almost as soon as they appeared on marketplaces. Of course, only the rich and powerful could open their own businesses. Most of the Dorwynrim from occupied territories had to find work wherever they could, and some reluctantly joined the Imperial Army. They retained their purple uniforms, the only difference was the grapevine that was emblazoned on them was now painted gold instead of white, and from that new symbol they received their new moniker. No longer were they grape stompers, but gold vines, though of course their countrymen in the west called them simply traitors. Some of these recruits joined regular runic regiments and embraced imperial masks and brass scales, but most were composed into separate regiments, partially because they still were not trusted enough by other runic officers. Another reason, however, was a bit more pragmatic. Dorwynrim fought in a different manner, and their tactics complemented other imperial units surprisingly well. And so most of the Northmen marched out into the field either as Thornguard, whose glaives worked well with other units on the front line, or as crossbowmen, to bring much-needed ranged firepower to the Golden Legions. Rhûn had a long tradition of archery, and most of its soldiers were skeptical of crossbows, for they needed no skill and barely any training, and any peasant could use them. But after hearing of their performance in action, Khanrukar himself ordered these weapons to be incorporated into his forces, especially when he learned of dwarven forces approaching imperial lands. These crossbowmen were attached to Uldor and Kabisa's army, and now intercepted dwarven forces in the field on a cold winter day. Erebor sent a much larger force than last time, not a single company, but an entire regiment with support of ballistae, though it was only a slight advantage, as runic forces had siege engines of their own. Still, dwarven engineers were renowned across the world, and imperial soldiers were apprehensive about being on the receiving end of massive bolts, but that was where their cavalry and Kabisa's leadership saved the day. As sun rose, both armies could see each other across a small valley, and it looked like the dwarves were content to sit on their defensible position and let the Easterlings come to them, tiring themselves out by wading through the snow. But although Erebor's soldiers were resilient and very difficult to dislodge from their position, they had no answers to both cavalry and archers their enemies brought to the field. The small hill the dwarves camped on was swiftly surrounded, and the ballistae crews desperately tried to reposition their machines to return fire at nomadic raiders who harassed them, but found it near impossible task. Soon, infantry started walking down the hill to push the horse archers away, and that was the moment other horsemen were waiting for, and they charged between gaps in the formation and fell upon dwarven engineers. The fight was over in moments, and some of the riders jumped down from their horses to cut the ropes of the ballistae, rendering them useless, and then riding away before they could be intercepted by returning infantry. With a stream of curses erupting from beneath his beard, Erebor commander realized the mistake he made. Now, without any mobility and ranged firepower, he could not hold his position on the hill, for Easterlings could simply shower him and his dwarves with arrows and bolts all day. So he ordered a full assault, and his warriors closed ranks and raised shields as runic arrows filled the sky with fire. Though, in doing so, they made themselves a perfect target for Imperial siege engines, and soon massive bolts flew through the air, carving holes in dwarven formations and impaling many soldiers with every shot. The archers proved to be a deadly threat as well, for the oil they poured on their arrows truly did prove to be a deadly mixture when paired with dwarven beards. To soldiers from the Lonely Mountain, their facial hair was a symbol of pride, one they'd never cover under their helmets. And now, when flaming arrows lodged themselves into these beards, they erupted in flames, spreading fear, rage, and unmistakable stench of burning hair. Any semblance of order and discipline disappeared from dwarven ranks as they rushed, screaming their fury towards Easterling lines, and were met by a hail of crossbow bolts from the gold vines. Eastern arrows had to hit a specific spot to be effective against heavily armored soldiers of Erebor, but quarrels from powerful hanged-crank crossbows had no such issues, and entire ranks of dwarves fell to the ground with every volley. By the time they reached Imperial lines, over half of Erebor's regiment was cut down, and the survivors were met by a wall of Haradrim pikes, glaives, and heavy battle axes. Within moments, dwarven formation got surrounded and swarmed by men equipped precisely to deal with heavily armored opponents, and what followed was a slaughter. Unable to push through pikes and kept at a distance by glaives and poleaxes, the dwarves could only curse as they were bunched up, pushed into each other, and methodically cut down. Some tried to escape, but were caught by cavalry and either butchered or captured. Before noon, all dwarves on the field were either dead or in chains, and Runic army barely lost a dozen men. The myth of unbreakable, ironclad army of Erebor was disintegrating, and Easterlings cheered at captured dwarves, expecting easy victories in the future. Only Uldor and a few veterans looked solemnly to the north, for they knew that this was not even close to the full might of the kingdom under the Lonely Mountain could muster. Still, as hundreds of dwarven prisoners were sent marching to the south to be sold on slave markets of Harat, Khand and Umbar, even the young lord felt a small twinge of optimism. He expected armies of Erebor to be a lot more deadly. Maybe, he thought, both he and his men would actually get through this campaign alive. Erebor was still far away, however, and though this recent victory meant Imperial army could start marching north, there were enemies a lot closer to home. To surprise of High Priest Karan's army, a company of Dorwinian knights has been spotted just outside of the walls of Karasant. They rode down 2 patrols and attacked travelers on the roads, something that did not seem fitting for the esteemed, honorable paladins of the Wine Court. But even weirder was the fact that they didn't seem intimidated in the slightest when Karan took a few hundred of his men and marched out to meet them. He had no hopes of catching up to the knights, for they could simply ride away, but to his utter surprise, the winemen didn't retreat. Instead, they set up on a small hill south of the city. Karan expected trouble and sent scouts out in all directions, but when they returned the next day, they brought news of no enemy forces in the area. The knights were alone. Charon took his men and approached the hill, setting up siege engines at its foot, fully expecting the paladins to ride away, for nothing was stopping them from doing so. But even as first bolts landed among the Northmen and killed first of them, they did not budge. They simply stood there, shouting at the top of their lungs at Easterlings to come closer, to fight like men. They did not, of course, and every ballista bolt was spent before infantry was sent to climb the hill. One by one the knights fell, only for back ranks to step forth to take place of the fallen ones. Even when they were being surrounded, they did not move. Charon wondered if these men were not, perhaps, honor-bound to defend the capital, and their sense of duty forbade them from retreating. Regardless of their reasons, however, the knights received the fight they wanted, as imperial spears and halberds fell upon them from all sides. The Northmen raised a deafening war cry and swung their blades with skill, but there was only one outcome. Moments later, the paladins were dead, and their commander, a mighty, brave, towering man, was overwhelmed and captured to be burned on the stake as an example. Charon himself tried to ask the man what did he try to accomplish by this suicidal stunt, but the Northman remained silent and was sent marching to the city under close watch. He'd break on the stake, Charon thought, but things were not going to go as easily as he thought. For in the night, suddenly, alarm bell rang out in the city. 2 of the guards who were keeping an eye on the paladin commander were found dead, and the man himself was gone. Riders left the city in all directions, but found no trace of the imposing warrior anywhere. The city was safe, but Imperial commanders couldn't shake the feeling something was very wrong, and couldn't help but wonder just what the hell did happen there in the night.
Of the most rare and glorious fruit. Have mercy, my lord.
That mysterious attack was not the only operation conducted by men of the West, though. 4 mere days later, General Margos and Lord Amdur have received news from their scouts about a column of purple-clad soldiers marching towards Mornethel. It was not a large force, but among their numbers was perhaps one of the deadliest weapons in Dorwinian arsenal, a company of mounted crossbowmen. Crossbows were not widespread in Rhûn, for the Empire had a long tradition of archery, and nigh all citizens were required to undergo military training with a bow. The realm of Wine, however, had no martial traditions like that, and most of its forces were feudal levies taken away from their lives and pressed into the army. For them, a crossbow was a perfect weapon. It took months or years to train a competent archer, but you could give a random peasant a crossbow and he'd be ready for war within a week. The weapon was powerful, and even though Easterling's scale armor was heavy, it was no match for a quarrel launched by even the most untrained recruit. And though it was also more expensive and complicated to produce, trade with Erebor meant that blueprints and craftsmen had all the materials they needed, and Thorn crossbowmen were renowned as one of the most important regiments defending the kingdom. The Wine Regent, however, took it a step further and mixed these soldiers into ranks of Dorwinian cavalry. The biggest weakness of a crossbow was its long reload time that left soldiers using it prone to being swarmed. But a horseman with a crossbow could gallop in, launch his bolt and ride out of danger to reload before the enemy could respond, and then repeat it all again. Such maneuverability meant that, when used by wise commanders, these men could reliably decimate entire enemy companies without any fear of retaliation. But alas, the general who led the march on Mornethel was perhaps not the wisest leader in Dorwinian's ranks. Instead of utilizing speed of his horsemen, he simply set them forward in loose formation to trade arrows with runic archers. And while crossbow bolts were far more deadly, Imperial army could put way more arrows in the air, and their bows outranged light crossbows wielded by the cavalry. Baron raiders had a field day as well. They split into 2 groups and surrounded Dorwinian soldiers, raining arrows on them without fear of retaliation. For even if enemy cavalry was to charge them, they could simply run away. Within mere minutes, the ranged skirmish was decisively lost by the Dorwinian troops, and on the front line, runic numerical advantage was taking its toll as well. Thorn regiments fought bravely, Clearly, training under elven blade masters was paying off, but eventually they gave in to the wave of brass-clad warriors and began dropping their weapons and fleeing into the woods. Their general and his paladins, both elves and men, tried to rally their comrades, but realized that it was a lost cause. The knights could see it plain as day. The battle was lost. Yet still they charged right into the fray, all except their general, who used the commotion to slink away and disappear among the trees. His remaining men were rounded up and put in chains, and soon sent marching east under guard. Elves were sent to Lest to further experiments of Charon and Abdus, while men would march all the way to Mataram, where they would be put to work in the iron mines. If they survived a year, Lord Amda told them, they'd be freed and could become citizens of the Empire. But for now, they had to walk off their defiance, though many of the captured soldiers didn't believe their captors, or expected that surviving that 1 year would be impossible. And indeed, when months later they arrived at Iron Pits of Mataram, they realized it was not a pleasant place, dusty, open pits on a sun-bleached steppe. But runic overseers of the mines proved surprisingly lenient. They had no use for dead walkers, they said, and made sure to keep conditions within the pits at least barely livable. Every prisoner was given quota, much higher depending on their rank within the army, with officers forced to extract as much as 5 times more ore than common soldiers. But if they could meet that quota, they'd be free to go. And this time, the words of overseers were made more believable by the fact that some of them were Dwynrim themselves, once captured early in the war, who were sent to the mines as well and lived through it. They were met coldly by their freshly captured brothers, but as days went by, the mood slowly shifted. Day after day, at sunset, priests of the dragon cult would descend into the pits with food and wine and preach virtues of the Empire to the prisoners, and slowly but surely warmed their way into their minds and souls. Some prisoners, of course, retained their resentment, but the priest had ways of seeing through lies of most men, and those who faked their newfound devotion to the great golden dragon were chained again, and sold as slaves to Khan, Harad or Mordor, and served as an example to others, for the only way they could survive was to join the Empire with both body and soul. Some perished during their sentence, for work in the mines was not a safe job even in the best of circumstances. But many of those who reached their quotas and left the mines were Dwynrim no longer, but imperial citizens through and through, just like Kanrukar and his ever-present dragon cult desired. Overall, it appeared that the Wine Kingdom was now in full retreat. The counterattack sent to Mornet Hell was small, no move was made to retake Karasant, and Sant-Anui, where forces were being mustered, was quietly emptied of most of its defenders. News reached Rhûn about a horde of orcs, goblins, and far worse creatures that emerged from Mirkwood and began raiding across western lands of Dorwinion and Dale, no doubt forcing the Wine Regent to split his forces. The only thing that prevented Imperial army from marching onwards was resistance within Karasant itself, but with every passing day, hope of the rebels was extinguished and their numbers dwindled without outside support. Dwarves of Erebor, however, were not out of the fight yet, and another army was sent to stop Uldor and Kabissa's force from marching on the Lonely Mountain. It was not a single regiment or lone company like before, but a fully fledged column, led by none other but Lord Thorin Stonehelm, son of King Dain, who ruled the Lonely Mountain. 1,500 dwarven warriors marched at his side, determined to stop the runic advance and send the Easterlings running. And they certainly were prepared, for this force was not just basic heavy infantry. Lord Thorin used his connections with Orokarni clans who lived far in the east, and mustered companies of hardy eastern dwarven spearmen and archers from Stiffbeard and Stonefoot clans, a perfect way to round up his force with soldiers capable of dealing with runic cavalry. Before he set off from Erebor, the prince also hired a company of cavalry from his allies in Dale, bringing much-needed mobility to his force. Thorin himself marched at the head of a banner of elite warriors clad in best armor Erebor has to offer, and though he was outnumbered, Dwarven Prince was sure of his imminent victory, for no eastern rabble could stand up to his veterans of many fights against orcs of the Misty Mountains. And Commander Uldor, in his own camp, agreed with that sentiment, and together with Kabisa agreed that to fight this battle fairly and openly would be inviting defeat. Instead, as lines formed in the golden glow of rising sun, the Easterlings sent the Rhûn to start harassing the dwarves and force them to come to them. Soon, first arrows fell upon Erebor formations, but Thorin was ready for it. His own Orokarni archers responded in kind, and Dalian cavalry rushed towards the nomads to chase them away. Imperial riders fell as sharp dwarven arrows pierced them and their horses, then panicked and galloped off, with Northmen in hot pursuit. But too late did men of Dale realize this was a trap, for as they pursued the nomads, suddenly a golden glint was seen from the woods nearby, and Kabisa and her Arulat cavalry, with their deadly lances, launched their ambush. Horsemen of Dale retreated but could not outrun faster Easterling horses, and soon the commoner heroine of Arulat people chased them down and pierced the first man she saw with her lance. The Clawguard were well trained in fighting other horsemen, and Dalians who were hired by Thorin were mostly scouts with no experience, and now they paid for it with their own blood. The only thing that saved them from a complete massacre were Orokarni archers who rained fire indiscriminately into the melee and forced Imperial cavalrymen to retreat. The damage was done, however. Thorin had only one company of horsemen, and now that company had no fighting power left, as only a handful of them survived this early skirmish. The prince pondered how to proceed, but the Easterlings quickly forced his hand by showering his dwarves with ballista bolts. For a while, ironclads of Erebor stood their ground, but soon realized their enemies had no honor and had no desire to meet them face to face. As another dwarven veteran was ripped in half mere step away from Thorin, he finally gave an order to advance. Like before, the response was a rain of flaming arrows. The Stiffbeards responded with their own, but their armor was light and their numbers dwarfed by Easterlings, and they could not hope to outshoot Imperial archers. The wind soon brought smell of burning beards, and moments later, dwarven lines thundered with outraged war-cry as Thorin and his warriors broke ranks and charged with bloodlust and fury towards their foes. Crossbow bolts toppled them as they ran, but not a single living dwarf stopped. Lines clashed. Warriors of the Lonely Mountain tried to push through Haradrim pike wall, only to be pushed away. On the flanks, the Lokerim and Fangguard glavesmen used their numbers to surround dwarven warriors and picked them apart one by one. No more was Easterling army intimidated by heavy armor of their short enemies, for that armor was useless if the warrior wearing it could not fight back. Long poleaxes and glaives were used to keep the dwarves at bay, and Easterling soldiers would then use them to hook their foes, drag them out of formation, and mercilessly wail on them until they stopped moving. It was not an honorable or dignified way to fight, but by the flame, Commander Uldor thought, it worked wonders. Erebor ironclads were effectively stopped dead in their tracks and exposed to deadly charges of Imperial horsemen, who learned a thing or two as well. No longer would they try to trample the dwarves like they do with men of Dorwinion. Instead, they'd put the entire momentum of their charge into a singular thrust of their lance and spear dwarven warriors beneath them like hunters on great oceans harpooned whales, for against such a strike, not even powerful steel from Erebor forges offered protection. The dwarves fought bravely, and whenever they broke through the blades that kept them at a distance, their axes carved a bloody path through Easterling troops. But it was not enough. With constant cavalry charges, with bolts and arrows raining all around them, with larger, more agile men surrounding them, warriors of Lonely Mountain found themselves completely unable to advance. Thorin Stonehelm, upon seeing this, decided to act. He took his retinues and charged towards a company of nomadic footmen, whose great axes were covered in blood of his brothers. With fury and vengeance, the dwarfs fell upon the Baroon and began cutting them down with ruthless precision, one by one, until almost entire company lied dead on the hill. But soon, they found themselves under crossbow fire and were forced to back off. General Uldor seized this opportunity and pushed the dwarven prince towards the main battle line to prevent his escape. Thorin and his guards formed a circle and tried to hold, but further down the line he could see his warriors wavering and running away, only to be chased down by Eastern horsemen. He couldn't even raise his horn to his lips to try and rally them, for their foes crowded them from all sides, and he could barely even catch a breath. Shields splintered, helmets buckled, armor dented from steady, relentless strikes of the Easterlings, and in such an unceremonious way, Thorin Stonehelm met his end. Not in an honorable fight, but from a poleaxe that struck his helmet for a 5th time and drowned him in darkness. Only 3 dwarfs survived this fight, including one named Narthi, adjutant and second in command to Thorin. When Uldor realized who they had in their hands, he immediately ordered the prisoners to be transported to Mistrand under heavy guard, for they could provide much-needed information for his march to the north. And though his men, together with Kabisa, wanted to celebrate this victory, he ordered them to march on, for now was the time to capitalize upon this battle. Imperial army force marched to the west, towards a small town of Kondovan, which, according to scouts, served as a supply post for dwarven armies. And it turned out, Uldor's hunch was right, for the place was defended only by a handful of soldiers from Erebor, more walkers than any true warriors, and they fell easily to overwhelming runic numbers. The town was seized, and with it, a fully stocked warehouse full of supplies, which the Easterlings could now use to keep up their momentum and keep marching ever northward. The war raged on, and although most minds of Easterlings were focused solely upon military matters, some of the more enterprising merchants of Rhûn departed to the west in hopes of establishing new trade routes. The conflict against Dorwinion teach them that, while kings and lords of the west may be their enemies, their people often tended to be open to make some coin, and exotic spices and silks from Far East often opened doors that erudite diplomats or great armies could not. After all, merchants of Gondor and Rohan were best examples. Though technically at war with Mordor, they had no qualms against travelling to Mistrand and coming back with caravans laden with eastern trade goods, though lately less and less of these traders arrived. Not because of some lofty ideals, but because orcs from Mordor and Dol Guldur became more common on the roads, and if a merchant wanted to make profit from a trip to the east, he'd have to hire a private army to deliver him there and back again. But while flow of wealth dwindled in the west, it increased every day in the south, as caravans from Khand, Harad and Nurn made their way into the heart of Easterling Empire. They all brought news from across the world with them, but of all the news that reached Mistrand, one stood out from the rest. Brought by merchant from distant lands of Eriador, was rumour of Lord Elrond the Half-Elf, master of Imladris far over the misty mountains cold, who marched at the head of an army of elven warriors to retake lands of Eregion from goblins of Moria, and then perished in the attempt. His army was scattered by surprisingly well-organized goblins, who crawled in untold numbers from depths under the mountain, and the High King was surrounded and gutted by their rusted weapons, and his head was sent back to his forest retreat in a mockery of a tribute. And though Rivendell was far away from Rhûn, even the Easterlings have heard of the mighty elven lord who once defeated Master of Barad-dûr, and so the news of his death were welcomed with celebrations. The West mourned, but the East cheered. One of its greatest foes was defeated, a clear sign that time of the elves was swiftly coming to an end. The merchants travelling west were prime examples that, even despite the war, the empire kept growing. But no place saw such growth of prosperity as Lest, much to surprise of the Golden Khan himself. When Charon left the city and marched on Dorwinion, he left Rukar's youngest son Abdus in charge of the province, and although Udege clan was not all that happy to be under command of a notorious coward, they quickly changed their tune when Abdus actually got to work and proved himself as a most capable governor. Many claimed he worked so hard, barely taking any breaks, to regain favor of his father, but whatever his reason really was, the results were spectacular. Over the past years, he improved Lest and surrounding areas greatly. He reorganized the Watch, fired corrupt officials, improved roadways and farmlands, and even ordered sewers and canals to be built in and out of the city. With every passing week, Lest grew, and with every idea Abdus had, more workshops, farms and manufactories sprang up across the province, attracting many people. And since the city was on the border of Dorwinion, many of the winemen settled there. People of other Easterling clans flocked to Lest as well, for it rapidly became a place where anyone could find work, and the city population swelled so much, local council asked Abdus to approve their plan of tearing down the old wooden walls and replacing them with proper stone ones, just like in Mistrand. The young governor agreed, of course, and personally oversaw planning and construction, for one look out the window was enough to see how the city outgrew its old defenses. New districts hugged the walls on the outside, filled with ambitious men who, slowly but surely, forgot about Abdus's cowardice and now lauded him as a great statesman. But some whispers still remained, not about his bravery though, or lack thereof, but other, darker dealings he now had. For while during days he worked tirelessly for the Empire in the province of Lest, at nights he'd retreat to the Temple of Dragonflame and work with acolytes on projects most mysterious. Guards prevented anyone from going in, but people whispered about strange noises coming from the temple. Unholy shrieks, explosions, and sometimes one could even see columns of flames erupting into the sky. One night, an entire wall of the temple disappeared in a flash of fire, and when Abdus attended council next day, he was covered in bandages. The city watch permitted no questions, but rumors persisted. Still, no one could deny young governor's acumen, and the people were proud that their city, once home to rebellious priests of the old cult, was now a model imperial settlement, one almost on par with Mistrand itself. Abdus cared little about their pride though. For him, leading Lest was just a necessity. In the dark, however, deep beneath the altar of the great dragon Smaug, he focused on his true goal. He would make his father proud, but more importantly, he would make himself proud. He would finally be able to look himself in the eye again, for his failure during the assault of the city weighed heavy on his mind, and the screams of the men abandoned at the gate haunted his dreams every single night. And although he knew that his project would most likely take many winters, in the end, he would light the flame of imperial order like no one ever did before. And then, no one would ever dare to call him a coward again.
Then send a runner to Dale, and to Mirkwood. I do not care how much it costs or how bad their own problems are. If they won't send reinforcements to us, they'll soon have those damned lizards on their heads. And send a missive to our agents in Karasant, and remind them to be more aggressive in their actions. Any one of our people who willingly supports Easterling occupation must know that a knife waits for them in every shadow. Worthless scum selling their country for a handful of coin. Bloody dwarfs, if only they came to our side of the river like we asked them to, we'd be sitting back in the capital already. Steward, we have to push the elves for more support, and no, not just gold. If they want to keep their fancy titles I bestowed upon them, they will have to take to the battlefield. Send... By the... Do my eyes deceive me, Sir Edwardin? You're alive! No thanks to you, Regent. What the hell was that operation you sent us on? A small company of knights alone going right into entire enemy army. You knew full well we wouldn't be coming back, you bastard. Do not forget your place, Sir Knight.
More so, do not forget who made you a knight in the first place, despite your issues with the law. I agree, sending your company of paladins to Coruscant was not the move I wanted to make, but I had to. I had to give the Easterlings a bait they could not refuse. Otherwise our plan wouldn't have worked, and our agent in the capital would never have the chance to leave. Your men have paid a heavy price, I agree, but trust me, Sir Knight, when I say that it was worth it. And, if you don't mind me asking, how did you manage to reach us? From what I heard, there were no survivors. I'm not that easy to kill, Lord Regent. They captured me and then got drunk on our wine, so I broke necks of my guards, dressed as one of them and walked right out of the bloody gate. All these masks they're wearing made it almost too easy. And despite what Easterlings like to say loudly, not everyone in the occupied territories support them. There are still plenty of loyal subjects in the East. But don't change the subject. How the hell a single agent bringing a single trinket back from the capital could have been worth a company of your best men?
It is worth far more, brave knight, and no doubt many more will fall before we are free from its corruption. Do you have it, Lord Regent? Is it secret? Is it safe?
Welcome back, Master Wizard. And yes, we have it hidden in a secure location, like you asked, though I'm afraid it is not as safe as we hoped for. It is good you warned us about Isengard, Mithrandir. Not 2 weeks ago an envoy arrived from Orthanc, offering great bounties for trinkets, as he called them. We sent him away, hopefully without revealing the truth.
Do not underestimate the Master of Orthanc, Regent. My old friend might have lost his way, but he remains the wisest of our order. I can only hope I can visit him one day and convince him to see through the madness that consumes him. But until that time, we must accept that there is an alliance between the two towers and treat the White Wizard as we treat the enemy himself. If it were to fall into his hands, we'd all be doomed.
Then why not use it if it's so powerful? Surely this
Don't even utter this word, brave knight. It is not a cheap trinket you're talking about, but an artifact of power beyond your understanding. And to use it is to do exactly what the enemy wants. The moment one of us would put it on, we'd find ourselves under the gaze of the Dark Tower. So it wants to be used, for it wants to be found, and it will whisper to anyone it can, promising power only to betray them in the end. So far we have managed to keep it hidden from his eye, but each day it becomes more difficult. I had hoped we could sneak it through the lands of Easterlings into Mordor while its gaze is focused on the west, but it is clear to me now we'll have to find another way. Give it here! It cannot stay in your lands, so close to the enemy and his minions. I will take it somewhere safe.
And where is such a safe haven, Mithrandir? We have heard the news from the west. Even Great Lord Elrond has fallen to the shadow. If Imladris itself is burning, then where else in the world can one find safety?
I'm afraid I cannot share this knowledge with you, for the sake of all of us. But know that not all hope is yet lost. Gondor remains a stalwart bulwark against the darkness, and the Steward will buy us the time to succeed in our quest.
Gondor is far away, Master Wizard. The Kingdom of Stone may survive, but what of us? Our homelands are occupied by Rhûn. Our own people lost faith and abandon our cause. Our allies flounder in the north. We can't stop the Empire alone.
You will have to, Lord Regent, for the sake of entire Middle-earth. But fear not, for the night is always darkest right before dawn. I shall bring you reinforcements you need. That I promise you. Until then, hold with all your might. People of Dorwinion are stronger than you think. Do not lose hope, and we will all prevail against this darkness.
Fancy words. I have heard such fancy words before, Mithrandir. I will not hold my breath for these reinforcements of yours, but I will not sit idly by either. Men, escort Master Wizards as far west as you can. Our fate is in his hands now. And you, Sir Edwardin, now that you're back, we have to rebuild your company and send you out again. And I'm finally ready to admit that you were right all these years ago, when you said it was a mistake to let elves buy their way out of military service. Time to send the word to all their settlements and make them understand. If they want to keep their fancy titles and privileges, they have to pick up their swords and fight for them with the rest of us.